so you're coming in with socialism on top. But I'm going to tell you straight up, capitalism wins because it respects individual freedom and keeps government power in check. You want to talk privacy rights or government power? Capitalism gives you less of that top-down surveillance state. So hit me with your best socialist argument, and I'll show you where it falls short.
All right, let's get into it. You say capitalism respects individual freedom more, but let's be real. Socialism actually gives people the real freedom to live without fearing that they'll lose healthcare, housing, or basic dignity just because they can't pay. You bring up privacy rights? Well, capitalism creates a surveillance economy where private companies track every move you make for profit. In a socialist framework, you can actually have stronger privacy from corporate spying because profit isn't the priority. So here's my follow-up. How do you defend capitalism's obsession with turning people into products?
Alright, I'll jump right in. You say socialism gives people freedom from fear, but let's not ignore that it often trades that off by putting a ton of power in the hands of the state. And when the government has that much control, you get a different kind of surveillance. Not just private companies watching you, but the state calling the shots on what you can and can't do. Now, sure, capitalism has companies that track data, but the flip side is you actually have competition and choice. If you don't like one company's practices, you can pick another or push for regulations that actually work. Under socialism, good luck opting out of what the state decides for you. So my question back to you is, how do you justify handing all that power to the state and calling it real freedom?
I'll tell you exactly how, because it's not about handing power to the state in some monolithic way. It's about democratizing power. Under socialism, the idea is that people collectively get a say. Instead of a handful of mega corporations deciding everything behind closed doors, you have a society where decisions about resources and privacy are made more openly and with public input. And let's be blunt. Competition in capitalism often just means a race to the bottom, where privacy is a commodity and real choice is an illusion when every major player is doing the same thing. If one company's got bad practices, sure, you can switch to another that's slightly less bad, but that's not real freedom. That's just picking between flavors of exploitation. So my challenge back to you, how do you justify calling it freedom when people are basically forced to live by the dictates of whoever has the most money, not whoever actually represents their interests?
Alright, I see where you're coming from, but let me flip that right back on its head. You say socialism is democratizing power, but in practice, what that usually means is centralizing a whole lot of authority in public hands that are no less capable of messing things up. You talk about how to use collective say, but that often turns into a bureaucratic nightmare, where actual individual voices get lost. Now let's be real, in capitalism, yeah, you have some big players, but you also have the ability to innovate, to break in with new ideas, and to actually shift the market if you've got a better product or a better way of doing things. That's the real freedom. The freedom to compete, to choose, to challenge the status quo. So I'll toss it back to you. How do you defend a system where in the name of public input, you risk drowning out individual innovation and end up with a one-size-fits-all solution that fits nobody perfectly?
I see what you're doing, but let's cut through that noise. You're painting this fantasy that capitalism is some kind of one playground for innovation and individual voices. In reality, it's a playground where the biggest players set the rules, buy out the little guys, and drown real innovation unless it's profitable to them. You talk about bureaucratic nightmares, but let's not pretend capitalism is some red tape for paradise. Ever dealt with giant corporations lobbying to kill off competition? That's not freedom. That's just private bureaucracy in a fancy suit. So here's the thing. Socialism isn't about one size fits all. It's about making sure the baseline is fair for everyone. And then you can innovate from there, without people having to worry about going bankrupt if they get sick or losing their home because the market crashed. That's real freedom. Freedom from the fear that capitalism loves to exploit. So tell me this. How do you defend a system that leaves so many people behind in the name of choice, when that choice is basically an illusion for anyone who isn't already on top?
Alright, let's cut right to it then. You're calling capitalism a playground for the big guys, and I'll give you that. It's not a perfect system, and yeah, there's lobbying and there's corporate nonsense. But here's the deal. Capitalism is adaptable. It's a system that at least gives you the tools to push back, to innovate, to create new solutions, and to change the game. You can't just paint it all as one big bad wolf and ignore the fact that a lot of the world's progress, technology, and improvements in quality of life came from that messy competitive environment. You're talking about a baseline of fairness in socialism, but often that baseline becomes a ceiling. You get fairness by leveling down, not by lifting up. And freedom from fear is great, but not if it means you never get the freedom to actually excel, to be rewarded for your effort, or to change your circumstances beyond what the state deems acceptable. So my defense is this: capitalism may leave some people behind, but it also gives them the tools to climb. It's not an illusion of choice if you actually have the ability to create something new, to push for change, and to hold those big players accountable through competition and innovation. That's my question back. How do you ensure socialism doesn't just turn into a ceiling that caps everyone at the same level, even if they could go higher?
Alright, let's be absolutely clear. You say capitalism is adaptable and gives tools to push back, but what that usually means is that a few people get to climb while a lot of others are left scrambling with no real thought. You're talking about a so-called messy competitive environment driving progress, but let's not ignore that a lot of that progress came with massive inequality and people being treated as collateral damage. Socialism isn't about capping anyone's potential. It's about making sure that everyone actually has a fair starting line. You don't get that in capitalism because the starting line is raped by who has money, who has influence, and who's already got power. And that so-called ceiling you're worried about, it's just another capitalist myth. Under socialism, you can still excel and innovate, but you're doing it in a system that doesn't let people fall through the cracks just because they didn't win the birth lottery. So here's my final challenge. If you really think capitalism's so great at giving people tools, why are so many people still struggling and left out? In socialism, at least we're honest about making sure everyone's got a fair shot. And that's a freedom that actually means something.
And I hear you on that. You're painting the picture that socialism is this honest broker making sure no one starts at a disadvantage. But here's the thing. In the real world, what often happens is that when you try to make everything fair from the start, you end up with a lot of bureaucracy that actually stifles that upward climb for everyone. You risk creating a system that's more about making sure no one rises too fast than about truly letting people flourish. And let's be real, capitalism isn't a myth about giving people a shot. It's a messy, imperfect system, but it has proven time and again that it can lift millions out of poverty, create opportunities, and yes, some people are left out. And that's where we need better social policies, not a total system overhaul. So my final word is this. Capitalism isn't about denying people a fair shot, it's about giving them the tools to make their own shot. It's not perfect, but allows for growth, for change, and for real individual freedom. And if we want to fix the problems, let's talk about smart reforms, rather than throwing out a system that, for all its flaws, has driven a lot of human progress.
And that's exactly where I'll leave it. You say capitalism just needs tweaks and that it's lifted people out of poverty. Sure, it has, for some, but it's also left a whole lot behind and caused massive inequality along the way. Socialism isn't about stopping people from flourishing, it's about making sure that flourishing isn't reserved for a privileged few. It's about making the baseline decent so that when people do rise, they're not stepping on others to do it. So let's wrap it up. You call it bureaucracy, I call it fairness. You call it freedom, I call it a rigged game that needs a better set of rules. And if we're talking about real human progress, maybe it's time to admit that we need a system built on equity, not just endless competition.
And that's a fair pant to end on. You see it as a rigged game needing a total rewrite, and I see it as a game that just needs better rules and some guardrails. We can agree to disagree on the path, but hey, that's what makes a good debate. At the end of the day, you're pushing for equity first, and I'm pushing for freedom and competition as the best tools to get there. So let's leave it at that. Two passionate sides both wanting a better world, just arguing about how to build it. Thanks for the sparring match.
Absolutely, well said. We've each got our angle on how to get to a better world, and it's always a good debate when we can lay it all out on the table. So thanks for the spar, and we can agree to disagree on the roadmap. At the end of the day, we're both aiming for a more just world, just taking different routes to get there.
Absolutely. I think that's the perfect place to wrap it up. We've had a good, lively back and forth, and it's always refreshing to hash out different visions for how to make the world a better place. So thanks for the debate.